all to the special international expert webinar on transgressive illusions and radical visions, Circus in 20th century children's literature. On this auspicious day dedicated to the goddess of prosperity, I respectfully welcome our beloved Secretary and Director, Dr. C.A. Vaski ma'am, the leading light of the institution. I welcome our most respected Principal, Dr. M. Lakshmanaswamy, our CEO, and other college authorities. I wholeheartedly welcome the distinguished speaker of the evening, Dr. Kimberley Reynolds, Professor of Children's Literature, Newcastle University, and Senior Editor in International Research in Children's Literature. Madam is the senior-most academician in the field, and she has been a source of inspiration for the establishment of children's literature research all over the world. It is a dream come true for me, ma'am, to have you here this evening. I welcome Dr. Andrew Thomas, my co-convener, Associate Professor, Department of English and College, THRISSUR. Sir has been a great source of... Madam? Thank you. Has been a source of inspiration and has been instrumental in bringing world experts in the field of children's literature in India to India. Welcome, sir. I especially welcome the subject experts and my good friends, Swapna Datta ma'am, Padma Balika ma'am, Swati Jaraje, and other authors and other experts. I welcome you. Welcome the erudite professors, research scholars, and students, both from India and abroad, for all gathered here. I welcome you all and sincerely hope that this evening sows the seeds of research in your fertile minds. Thank you all, and welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, ma'am, for your warm welcome. And now I request Andrew sir to introduce the chief guest.
Good evening, everyone. Can you please put on the PowerPoint presentation? No, Kim, I'm sorry, not to you.
Oh, you have a different one. Yeah. Okay, beg your pardon, Anto. I'm just trying to...
It's okay, ma'am.
Doesn't disappear. There. Oh, yeah. Hang on.
Professor Shava, right. Can you put on my PowerPoint presentation? Good evening, everyone. We, a group of academicians mainly interested in children's literature, and our postgraduate as well as research scholars are extremely happy and proud to have with us online Professor Dr. Kimberley Reynolds of Newcastle University, a world-renowned scholar and critic in children's literature studies. Professor Kim is one of the pioneering professors of children's literature in UK, who established the National Centre for Research in Children's Literature 30 years ago in 1991, winning the laurels of the Queen's Prize for Higher Education. She has also organized several times the most sought after Children's Literature International Summer School. Until now, she has guided around 30 doctoral students through to successful completion, and she has supervised on a wide range of topics from historic children's literature through comparative studies, genre-based research, creative writing, and digital children's literature. Professor Kimberley Reynolds has held the office in a number of influential academic boards and committees in the UK and internationally. Since 2017, she has been the senior editor of the prestigious IRSEL journal, International Research in Children's Literature, published by Edinburgh University Press. She was the president of IRSEL, the International Research Society for Children's Literature, from 2003 to 2007, and it was during her tenure as the president of the organization that the IRSEL focused its attention for the first time on promoting membership from Asian countries. She is the founder member of Children's Laureate Steering Committee. In 2013, she received the most prestigious International Brothers Grimm Award for her contributions to children's literature studies. 2 of her books have received the esteemed CHLA, Children's Literature Association Book Award. She had been the trustee member and chair of 7 Stories, the National Centre for Children's Literature Books in UK. Above all, she has advised and contributed to many children's literature broadcasts, programs, films, blogs, and other projects, including for the British Library and the British Council. In addition to her invited paper presentations in the UK, Professor Kimberley Reynolds has often been a keynote speaker in many countries and at major international events over the years. Speaking of her academic publications, apart from authoring and editing more than a dozen of books in children's literature, she has to accredit many scores of peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters. Let me introduce to you a few of her books. One of her most preferred books has been Children's Literature, A Very Short Introduction, published by Oxford University Press in 2011. It's a primary reading for any Indian scholar who develops an interest in children's literature studies, and it is recommended to have a personal copy each for your reading reference. Her most recent publications are Left Out, The Forgotten Radical Tradition in Children's Publishing in Britain, 1910 to 1949, again by Oxford University Press in 2015. Children's Literature in the New Millennium by Northcote House in 2012, and Radical Children's Literature, Social and Aesthetic Transformation, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2007. She has also edited many books, including Reading in Rebellion, an anthology of radical writing for children, 1900 to 1960, published again by Oxford University Press in 2018. Death, Emotion and Childhood in the Early Modern Period by Palgrave Macmillan in 2017, and Children's Literature Studies, a handbook by Palgrave in 2010. Dear Professor Kim, I'm sure you do remember your visit to Coimbatore and Kerala 12 years ago in 2008, when you had been the keynote speaker to the international conference I organized in connection with the International Research Society for Children's Literature IRCL board meeting in India. Had there not been the impediments of the present pandemic, I'm sure that KONGUNADU Autonomous College in St. Thomas, THRISSUR would have invited you now to be our keynote speaker in a collaborative venture of our organizing an international seminar. However, the topic of the webinar is a highly exciting one. Many early 20th century artists explored the aesthetic potential of the circus, and during these years, circus provide dynamic and intrinsically transgressive spaces. Throughout these decades, circus regularly featured in children's literature. Drawing on a range of predominantly visual texts, I am sure that Professor Kim's webinar presentation will consider how far children's books make use of the radical potential of the circus visually and thematically. Finally, appreciating the efforts of Dr. Shobha Ramaswamy and her colleagues from KONGUNADU Autonomous College in Coimbatore, I now request Professor Kimberley Reynolds to make her webinar presentation on Transgressive Illusions and Radical Visions, Circus in 20th Century Children's Literature. Thank you, and I apologize, ma'am, for the delay.
Well, I thank you, my dear friend Anta, and I am grateful to Shobha Ramaswamy and her colleagues for this invitation. Can you all hear me clearly and see my presentation?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Excellent.
I request all others to mute their mics.
Okay, well, it gives me great pleasure to be working once again with colleagues in India. My husband and I had a marvelous visit where we learned. I'm sorry, I'm getting a great deal of feedback.
இந்த ஆகஸ்ட் மாசத்துல என்ன பண்ணணும், ஆகஸ்ட் மாசத்துல 2 மேல வந்துச்சு, ஆகஸ்ட் மாசத்துல என்ன பண்ணணும், ஆகஸ்ட் மாசத்துல இது பண்ணணும், ஆகஸ்ட் மாசத்துல அதை பண்ணணும்.
Shall I resume?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Once again, I request all the listeners to mute their mics.
Okay. Well, I'm grateful for this opportunity to share research from my new project, which, as Dr. Thomas has explained, examines an aspect of children's literature that has received very little attention: the circus story. Now, I find these stories quite fascinating, and as you will hear, there are a great many of them in some parts of the world. I know that India has a long tradition of circus performances, but so far, probably because I don't speak any of the local languages, I have only come across one book about Indian circuses that seems to be directed at least partially at children. I do not think this is a children's book because it was turned into prestigious art exhibitions in New York and Los Angeles, but nevertheless, it uses the visual format and foregrounds children. This is the only Indian book that I have found so far, so I would be grateful if those of you who are listening this evening might send me some other suggestions of books that I could look at. For the moment, I'm going to tell you about children's publishing in the West, where the circus has been a consistently popular setting, theme, metaphor, and space in publishing for children from at least the start of the 19th century. And writers, illustrators, and readers have been attracted to it for many reasons. So, stories set in circuses may be glamorous or grotesque, dark, disturbing, and dangerous, or lighthearted and comic. Often these modes coexist in the same story. Despite their variety, circus stories form a discrete genre with a clear set of conventions. And while focusing on marginalized outsiders and dazzling moments of escape from the daily grind, as Buckland's analysis of carnival shows, such temporary interruptions to the status quo can do serious social work. Now, I know that Bakhtin's theory of carnival has been used a great deal over the last few decades, but I think it's very appropriate when we're looking at this material because his most important works were produced in the same time as the circus stories that I am discussing tonight, and he specifically identified circuses as a form of carnival. So let's begin by looking at the genre. Despite their diversity, the characteristics of juvenile circus stories are readily identified. The action almost invariably begins with the arrival of the circus, and it focuses on the impact of the circus on local children or a specific child. The first form of impact is the vanquishing of the tedium, restrictions, and in some cases, privations of childhood. From the bright posters announcing that a circus is coming, through the circus parade and culminating in performances under the big top, the quotidian world becomes secondary. Then the circus world is exotic, international, polyglot, excessive, and carnivalesque, containing animals from distant lands, astonishing illusions, gravity-defying aerialists and acrobats, antic behavior of adults in the roles of clowns, and in the past at least, sideshows featuring what have traditionally been known as freaks. Circus stories also feature juvenile performers who are often presented as glamorous and extraordinarily talented. Before looking specifically at works about such children for child readers, I need to make some connections between the circus and avant-garde arts in the early 20th century, because my aim is to show that circus stories contribute to the same hugely significant cultural debates as these artworks. Indeed, I first became interested in circuses when I realized how often the first wave of modernist and avant-garde artists and authors used the circus setting as a quintessentially radical aesthetic space, a space where themes and ideas are explored with a view to challenging and changing how the everyday world is perceived and organized, and not just for a cultural elite. Many of the best-known modernist and avant-garde artists were attracted to circuses in part because they appealed to a broader public than traditional art venues. Rich and poor, high and low, all came to the circus. Significantly for our purposes, that broader public included children, and in circus stories, children are present as both performers and spectators. Children have always been among those who enjoy watching circuses, but this does not mean that circuses are good places for the young. The experience of real child performers have often been brutally abusive, and many of the first circus stories for children concentrated on this aspect of circus life. And I think this Swedish painting of a circus master displaying a child's body and trying to move him on or sell him for the tricks that he can do captures that sense of abuse and the lack of respect for the child's body very well. Stories about the suffering of young circus performers make up a complete subgenre that has persisted from the earliest examples of the genre to the present. Perhaps some of you have read Erin Morgenstern's global bestseller, The Night Circus of 2011. For instance, the two children at the start of that novel undergo horrendous deprivations. They endure isolation, excruciating punishments, and emotional manipulation of the highest order. Today, however, I am looking at a different aspect of circus stories. The way the circus setting was used by children's writers and illustrators to adapt and redirect towards a juvenile audience the artistic experiments and political critiques found in arts and leisures from the first half of the last century. To set up the comparison, let's look at a few examples of how circuses were used by modernist and avant-garde artists, a great many of whom were attracted to circuses, watching, drawing, and painting them repeatedly. Here, for instance, we have Pablo Picasso's 1905 Family of Saltimbanques, or Tumblers. This is just one work from Picasso's Rose or Circus period, time when he regularly used images of circus performers as metaphors for the socially and financially precarious position of artists. Like circus performers, he suggests innovative, challenging artists in the early 20th century in Europe and America were regarded as insignificant and expendable outliers by those in positions of power. Henri Matisse had a lifelong interest in circuses and what they said about movement, freedom, and creativity. These images come from his book Jazz of 1947, which was originally titled The Circus. More than half of the images in that book are of circus performances. Fernand Léger and Marc Chagall were also fascinated by circuses and appreciated the way circuses liberated both bodies and minds from convention. Their paintings often focus on the way kinesthetic experiences create the sense of both mental and physical liberation from the constraints of everyday life. This small sample of work gives a sense of how circuses offered artists new perspectives from above, the top of the big top, maybe on a trapeze or a high wire, and from below, down in the pit or the audience, looking up to the performance. The circuses also celebrated speed, flight, and simultaneity, for instance, in the form of multiple acts happening on the ground and the air at the same moment. Circus rings and the contorted body shapes made by acrobats and aerialists lent themselves well to abstraction, while the transition from acts featuring spangled, gravity-defying artists, lumbering elephants, ferocious big cats, bizarre clowns, and the exceptional bodies found in circus sideshows gave a surreal, dreamlike quality to the circus experience. And for me, one of the most surreal examples is this amazing performance where 50 elephants in pink tutus danced with 50 ballerinas to the music of Igor Stravinsky. This was a circus performance which traveled over all the major cities of the United States, and it was turned into a picture book for children in 2006. In addition to those surreal qualities, the inter-artistic nature of circus acts spoke to avant-garde interests in what they referred to as total art, meaning the combining of words, music, lighting, movement, and the plastic arts to provoke new sensations and perceptions. It wasn't just fine artists who found circuses fertile spaces for new responses to culture and politics. Avant-garde writers and performers outside of circuses were also drawn to circuses for these purposes and for their subversive potential. As Bakhtin observed about all forms of carnival, the new outlooks on the world they provide feed cultural change. Understanding of the radical potential of the circus setting and publications for the young is much enriched when viewed through the lenses provided by performance and literary theorists. For instance, in anti-Nazi modernism, Mia Spiro points to the way that the decades which witnessed the rise of fascism and Nazism also saw the deliberate use of circuses to challenge the worldview those obnoxious political ideologies promulgated. This deployment works well since circus life and circus acts stood for everything such regimes sought to suppress. To give one example, in her 1936 novel Nightwood, Juna Barnes includes a circus interlude which establishes the circus as the only place where lesbian, transgender, and other characters who struggled to fit into life in 1930s Paris and America can be at ease. This is because Barnes makes the circus a space where no one is alien because everyone realizes that social positions, race, and sexuality are performances. Understanding the performative nature of all aspects of social life, and not least those on political display, undermines the kind of mass spectacles by which totalitarianism asserts its power. So, for instance, performance theories relating to audience response call attention to the different effects on spectators of circuses as compared with the huge and highly choreographed rallies favored by Nazi propagandists. These mass spectacles were a deliberately hypnotic, homogenizing, and coercive kind of event. Their effect was to make most participants and observers unquestioning and conformist. And I think you see something similar at work in some of Donald Trump's huge gatherings of supporters. Circuses, by contrast, are energizing and individualistic. Performances are not designed to lull audiences, but to provoke them. Their astonishing and often dangerous acts make audiences ask, how do they do that? In this way, spectators are encouraged to recognize that they are watching tricks and illusions and to think about and deconstruct them. Exactly the opposite effect of the Nazi Trump rallies, which do not bear much scrutiny. More than that, as in Knightwood, surfaces in life and on the page were intrinsically transgressive spaces in the interwar years because they were ethnically, socially, and sexually diverse. They mixed levels of discourse, they displayed fluidity, eroticism, exoticism, and hybridity. The peripatetic nature of circuses means that they were also free from geographical boundaries, while their audiences took pleasure in encountering normality-shattering distortion, exaggeration, and category mingling, such as animal and human, beautiful and grotesque, whimsical and parada. And you can see what I think constitutes the grotesque here in the skeleton man on the left, while on the opposite end you have Eastern European. The little girl Mary on horseback is presented as very beautiful and is much admired by two orphan children who are soon to join the circus themselves. They buy into the fantasy of the lovely life of the circus. Circuses, therefore, offered abundant metaphoric potential for celebrating freedom of thought, movement, and interaction at a time when all of these were under threat. This made them valuable subject for those modernists and avant-garde artists who were opposed to the divisive, hierarchical, nationalistic, and militaristic politics of the far right. In their hands, the circus was simultaneously offered as a site of intellectual and cultural provocation and a place of delight. Now, my question is, this is my big research question for this part of my project. Do these attributes from avant-garde art carry over into the juvenile circus story in the first half of the 20th century? Now, delight is certainly part of the appeal of circus stories to children. In them, circuses are replete with anarchic possibility, providing a space where people fly through the air, huge elephants balance on tiny balls, and grown-ups dress up and behave in eccentric, undignified, zany ways. But does that mean that children's writers and illustrators during these decades also constructed the circus as a socially or politically radical space? Well, let's see how provocative they are when we look at a few examples. Soviet writer Yuri Olesha's The Three Fat Men of 1928 quite clearly uses the circus to criticize oppressive rule and to celebrate imagination, creativity, and intellectual freedom. This is a story about revolution. In it, the oppressed people in an unnamed town rise up against the three fat men who rule their land and literally consume all its resources. Though it is not geographically or chronologically anchored in a particular time or place, because its author was living in the new Soviet Republic and the story was completed just 1 year after the series of revolutions that saw the old imperial Russian rule replaced by the world's first communist society, it is difficult not to link the book to those events. For our purposes, what is significant about Olesha's novel is that the revolution is led by members of a circus. One of these is Tibulus the tightrope walker, who you see in the illustration on the right. The other is Suak, the girl acrobat. But even before those two begin to take control of the events, a circus act has been encouraging the people to disrespect their three fat leaders. For instance, this act is performed in the village square where the three are represented on a stage by a trio of fat, hairy apes, while a clown sings, "Like 3 great sacks of wheat, the 3 fat men abed, for all they do is eat and watch their bellies spread. Hey, you fat men, beware, your final days are here." The clown is right. The surreal plot, which includes separated twins, kangaroo trials and arbitrary sentences, a living doll, a talking parrot with a beard, and a great many extravagant banquets, culminates in the overthrow of the three fat men. The people are inspired or provoked to liberate themselves by those with courage, creativity, education, and morals. All of the provocateurs are connected in some way to the circus. The Three Fat Men is a novel aimed at able readers, and Olesha's use of the circus is deliberately and overtly political. But even books for much younger readers celebrate the same values of internationalism, category mixing, simultaneity, and total art found in modernist thinking and writing. One of these is Samuel Marshak and Vladimir Lebedev's The Circus of 1925. What you're looking at is not from 1925. This is an English omnibus edition put out in translation by the Tate Gallery about 10 years ago. This book belongs to the outpouring of much admired books produced in the first decades of Soviet rule, often by avant-garde writers and artists who hoped that they were helping to build society anew. The circus, too, celebrates the internationalism and eclecticism of circuses. For its original readers, the book's internationalism mirrors the drive to unite the many countries and peoples with their different languages, eye shapes, skin tones, hair colors, and fashions that made up the new Soviet Union. Its other task relates to the work of transforming an illiterate peasant culture into one which was both literate and ready to welcome, rather than to fear or to resent, modern technology. The circus begins with a poster, which you see here on the right, based not on the highly decorated traditional fairground graphics, usually favored by circuses. And I showed you an example of that earlier on. Let me just show you. Here we go. You can see the long circus poster there. That is the traditional look of a circus poster. And of course, what we're looking at now is something quite different. Modern advertisements, I would say. And you can see that in its use of clean lines, sharp typography, and white spaces. Huge repeated exclamation points convey that very modernist quality of energy, while the text promises eclecticism in the form of a rider from Rio, an aerial trio, Jacko the famous clown all the way from Paris. Inside, a black tightrope walker is used to familiarize the workings of a telephone message. So you see here modern technology being presented as both thrilling, exciting, and unthreatening, while a green musician, so strange alien, is introduced as the wife of a Soviet clown, so domesticating the foreignness. In line with the modernist appreciation of speed and dynamism seen in the paintings we looked at the beginning of this talk, many images show figures in motion, zooming this way, galloping that, balancing precariously, and defying gravity. Circuses and the things they represent were not exclusively a Soviet preoccupation, however. In the British-produced The Circus book of 1935 by Wyndham Payne with illustrations by Eileen Mayo, Japanese acrobats practice on one page, while a man in evening dress is shown working alongside clowns and performing horses ridden by a bear and a lion on another. All are very familiar circus images, but when considering the significance of representing the way categories are mingled under the big top in these books, it is important not to forget the extent to which, in interwar Europe, when this book appeared, racial and national origins, sexuality, and physical development could determine a person's fate. From policies in Nazi Germany to fascist demonstrations in London, Jews, Romani, a group very closely associated with circuses, and others deemed inferior by those in authority were vilified and often attacked. This made the social eclecticism characteristic of circuses were not only many Romany work, but also a great many physically unusual performers, innately transgressive. Such hybridity was taboo under the scientific racism espoused by Nazis and other fascists. And in circuses, this was compounded by the way bearded ladies, living skeletons, and individuals who seemed almost to cross species, such as the so-called elephant man and pony boy, populated the sideshows that were then a standard feature of circuses. Like many children's circus books, much is made of the internationalism and inclusiveness of circuses in the circus book. It asks children to admire the ability of circus performers to speak many languages so that they can work together. Here's a quote from the book. Circuses engage artists of every nationality, so you can imagine the kind of babble of tongues behind the scenes. Some of the directors can give orders in half a dozen different languages. Nearly all the artists can speak at least 2 or 3 besides their own, and a well-known clown was able to do his act in 12 languages. This short information book is not overtly provocative or revolutionary. Nevertheless, readers of this book are invited to admire what elsewhere in society was being presented as suspect. Undoubtedly, the most famous circus story for children is Dumbo, as told through the 1941 Walt Disney animated feature film. Dumbo, in fact, began life as an experiment in form. Called a roller book, readers were able to make characters move in limited ways by turning a knob to advance the pictures. Disney bought that story and, alongside the film, repackaged it in a more conventional picture format. The series of Dumbo books had huge print runs. Typically, 209,000 of the 1941 picture book were printed. Of interest to us this evening is the way the animated film incorporates aesthetic elements that give a modernist edge to the artwork that subtly comments on the alienation of workers and the loss of identity in modernity. Notable among these are the edgily impressionistic depictions of the roustabouts who set up the big top in a storm. And you can see they're figurative, but they're also shapes rather than distinguishable characters. And crowds fleeing as the huge tent collapses when Dumbo knocks over the pyramid of pachyderms. You can see outside that tent little blue bunches, which might look like bushes to you, but in fact those are meant to be groups of people, all indistinguishable enough from each other, behaving as a mob mass rather than as individuals. Because scenery conveys mood, while Freudian inflected experimental sequences such as People of the Tom Parade bring in other avant-garde interests around subtlety, interiority, and the psyche. The most pointed aspect of radicalism focuses on racist policies in the United States at the time. This occurs in the section where Dumbo and Timothy meet Jim Crow and his gang. The name Jim Crow refers to the laws that enforced segregation in the U.S. right up to the 1960s. Significantly, the Crows dress and have mannerisms of scat or jazz musicians. Jazz clubs were places where whites and blacks often mixed. Dumbo and Timothy also mixed with Crows in defiance of the segregationalist agenda, and it is the Crows who enable Dumbo to fly and become a hero. Their knowledge of psychology leads to the magic feather that persuades Dumbo he can fly. Altogether, there is a plethora of politically and aesthetically radical elements in Dumbo, including the extensive references to altered states of consciousness, dreams and drunkenness, for instance, references to the workings of the psyche, celebrations of speed, transport, and the juxtaposition of different artistic and musical styles and emotional registers. More aesthetic radicalism is found in Clark Hutton's illustrations for Noel Streatfeild's Circus Shoes of 1938. It was re-illustrated by Hutton much more successfully and powerfully in 10 years later. Again, we see the visual text evoking the simultaneity, heterogeneity, and aerial perspectives associated with modernist art and circuses. I think that picture on the right, for instance, could easily come out of Paris in the 1930s, from the perspective to the kinds of figures and events taking place. The image is
Dr. Kim, ma'am, is everything or any technical issue? Dr. Kim, ma'am, is there any technical issue? Shall I help? Ma'am is muted.
Why is the Kim's talk muted?
Maybe, ma'am. I'll just check. Just check whether she's muted now. Muted.
Can't hear at all.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear? Yes. How long have I been muted for?
About 3 minutes, ma'am.
Okay, do you want me to repeat material, or what would you like me to do?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, I need to put the presentation back. Can you remember roughly the last thing you could hear? Did you see the, let me get the presentation up, and you tell me what you could last hear.
I remember Dumbo.
Circus shoes by Noel Streatfeild.
Okay, the Noel Streatfeild material. Thank you, Anta. Right, I'll try to share now. I don't know why it muted. I beg your pardon, everybody. And now my presentation isn't there.
It's all right, ma'am. Please continue.
We can't see you now, but we can hear you, but can't see
Okay,
you.
I'm just trying to get your presentation together. Okay. Can you see images now?
No.
Okay. You can't see anything?
Just the icon.
Everybody else can see the images though?
Yes, ma'am. Not yet.
Okay. So we're going back to the Clark Hutton. These are the Clark Hutton pictures for Noel Streatfield's circus shoes. Okay.
We can't see your presentation. Please put on your...
Oh, okay. I'll have to try again. Hang on. Okay, application window.
Yes.
Can you see things now? Okay, good. Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Thank you.
Please come to your particular
You're all
slide.
very patient. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Okay, so these are Clark Hutton's 1948 illustrations for Noel Stretfield's Circus shoes. He re-illustrated it 10 years after it appears, and I think they are much more successful and positive. And I think in them you can see their visual text evoking the simultaneity, heterogeneity, and aerial perspectives associated with modernist art and circuses. And for me, the picture on the right in particular feels as if it could have come out of Paris in the 1920s or 30s. These images, I think, fit well with the story of two orphans, Peter and his sister Santa, who are threatened with being placed in separate children's homes when their aunt dies. And so they run away to their uncle who works in a circus. Now, the children who live in the circus and who are asked to look after Peter and Santa are bewildered by their sense of class superiority. This pair think that they are better than the circus children because they come from a middle-class home. But they don't have a single skill relevant to circus life. They don't even know how to look after themselves in the most basic way, while the circus children are very competent in a great many ways. This caused the circus children to say they are like babies just born. But in fact, Peter and Santa are reborn into the circus family, discovering unsuspected talents, learning the importance of work and how to belong to the circus community. Most importantly, they shake off the false values they have acquired from the snobbish aunt who had been raising them. Peter also discovers that his little sister is better than he is at adapting to their new lives, while she stops assuming that he knows best just because he's older and male. The story then challenges social, gender, age, and class assumptions prevalent in 1938. It also celebrates the way performers from different backgrounds all contribute to the success of circus. And it takes a very pointed political line by calling one of the performing sea lions Hitler. Now, I'm coming to the very end of the talk, my final example, which is The Circus of Adventure by Enid Blyton. Now, at the level of storytelling, there's not much radical about this 1952 book, and some of its attitudes are not exactly progressive. Nevertheless, when the four adventurers, Philip, Dinah, Lucienne, and Jack, and the young Central European prince who is in their charge, seek refuge in a circus as they flee from a palace coup, behaviors that would have been suspect in other settings are valued. For instance, the young prince, Gustavus Aloysius, known as Gussie, is disguised from the authorities by being dressed as a girl, making a virtue of the fact that princes in his country must have shoulder-length hair. Gussie, who has annoyed the British children with his imperious ways, wins their respect when soldiers ransack the circus looking for the fugitives. He gives a bravura performance, blushing and shyly hiding his face in the lap of Ma, the circus woman who is pretending to be his grandmother. Anna Marie, as Gussie has been renamed, so charms the soldiers that they give her some money to spend in the shops. This is particularly impressive since the soldiers are, of course, from Gussie's own family's private guard. The four British children have also been disguised with grease paint, circus costumes, and an invented language. Because this is a circus and so outside what the soldiers considered to be the real world, they see insignificant itinerant performers rather than their prince and his middle-class British minders, and soon depart. The success of the children's performances owes everything to the help of their circus friends. Their class background, age, and nationality become unimportant, and the children are valued for their skills with animals and their willingness to join in the work of keeping the circus on the road. As in the mythology that has grown up around circuses, all the members of the circus are portrayed as a big family, though they come from many countries and speak dozens of languages. Outside hierarchies are also of little consequence to the members of the circus. When the young prince objects to his treatment by Ma, the woman who plays his grandmother, she responds, "Pah, you're just a boy. I've no time for princes." The narrator reinforces her statement by observing approvingly, "And she hadn't." Such a celebration of classless internationalism is highly unusual for the broadly conservative, patriotic Blyton. And since the book appeared during an active phase of the Cold War, its celebration of internationalism would have required considerable context and explanation if it were not for the well-established circus setting. Like the soldiers who failed to spot 4 British children and their own prince amongst the polyglot, many-colored troupe, readers are expected to accept that different attitudes and perspectives pertain in a circus. The transformative effects of the circus on Gussie proved permanent. His time with the performers, and of course the 4 British adventurers, has made him a stronger, better young man with a new, more respectful attitude to his people and those who lack his social position. He has shown himself to be courageous and capable, winning the respect and friendship of the others, and the right to cut the long hair which has made his disguise so successful. Gussie, it is implied, is on his way to becoming a modern ruler and a better ally for Britain. This is arguably a convenient rather than a radical conclusion from a British perspective, yet for much of the book, even an author known for finding foreigners stupid and suspect, the circus turns others into loyal, creative, heroic friends who use their circus skills to thwart a coup. The circus setting then shapes the book's message, sets up expectations in readers, and refashions the author's ideological assumptions. And now, having arrived at mid-century, which brought revised visions of children and children's literature, it's time to bring this whistle-stop tour of circuses and children's books in the first half of the 20th century to a close. I hope, though, that I've succeeded in demonstrating the many ways in which this collection of circus stories shared interests, agendas, and modes with the experimental arts and letters of these decades. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. My growing collection of circus stories, to which I hope to add some from India, including many from the present day, shows that for many writers and illustrators, the circus continues to provide an aesthetically and politically radical space, theme, and metaphor that allows them to make the case for both social and personal transformation. So I can stop sharing. And we can move perhaps on to questions or whatever happens next.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. And before that, I really apologize for the technical difficulties we had in the beginning of this program. I'm really sorry
please
for that.
Don't worry. Please don't worry.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Your presentation was indeed wonderful and very simple, and we could really enjoy it. We taken back to our childhood days. And now I think the session is open for questions. And we have few questions in the chat box. I'll just share that, ma'am.
Okay.
Now, I have a question too.
Yes, ma'am, you can ask, ma'am, no problem.
Now?
Yes, ma'am, you continue.
Okay. I just wanted to say something that, Circus of Adventure is not a very good example of Enid Blyton's portrayal of circus life, because there the circus comes in only by the way as a part of the plot. Actually, her other circus books, Mr. Galliano's Circus and Circus Days Again, which is a series, or Come to the Circus, or The Circus Book, all these give a far clearer picture of as it used to be and the kind of life led. I think Circus of Adventure is not a very, should I say, happy example, because you really get to get interested about the circus and get to see it in the other circus books, which is exclusively based on the circus.
Well, the other books do feature in my studies, Swapna, but I thought when I'm thinking about internationalism and Cold War themes, anti-fascism and so on, the Circus of Adventure worked well for me. But it was also a book that I liked very much because for me as a reader, the circus is very lively.
Sorry, Kim, I didn't mean to criticize. I just wanted to remind you that the other books, you get a far, more elaborate picture of what circus life used to be like and the people and all that.
No, you're quite right. And not everybody knows those books, Swapna, so your knowledge is impressive. Thank you.
I grew up reading those books when we were in school and seeing the number of reprints, it would be obvious that they must have been very popular in the UK as well. Seeing the number.
Yes, indeed. They were very popular. And as I said, they will feature, but in a different chapter.
Yes. But your point about what you said about Gussie and the attitude and all that, we too felt it pretty strongly. So thank you for pointing it out.
Okay, thank you, Swapna.
Thank you, ma'am. We have one question here. One Dr. N. Soumya Kumar, he wanted to know, can you suggest any collection of children's work for PhD scholars?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear collection.
Any collection of children's work for PhD scholars?
I'm not sure what the question is asking. Do they want recommendations for a collection?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Recommendation for doing thesis work for PhD.
Thesis work. So a collection that they might visit. Well, actually, I recently taught a summer school where the students did presentations on archives, collections of materials in different libraries in many countries. And I have those presentations. If this student or doctor would like to write to me, you can give my email address. I can send these presentations. They show a great many from New York to Ukraine. And there's opportunities for many kinds of research in children's literature. I'm sure in Indian archives as well, though I'm not expert on those.
Okay, ma'am. Another question from Manu, a PhD research scholar under the supervision of Dr. Hunter Thomas. And his question is a little bit long, ma'am. I just read it. Okay. It's about the lines in Nightwood by Duna Barnes. As quoted in the presentation, even social positions are performances by people towards society. So living in a typical Indian society where our neighbors are more conscious about our lives than our parents, people are compelled to abide to certain social norms like marriage at right age, ideal life, ideal wife, etc. Shall these two be considered just like a performance to convince a society that stays watchful around and people live in a totally dissatisfied life deep within, just like the artist in a circus?
That's a very profound question. Yeah. I'm not qualified to answer it from an Indian perspective. But I think many of us feel that we live, our lives are performances that are controlled by external factors. Maybe not quite as many factors as are mentioned there, but I think that person might find many things of interest in how circuses work and the idea of performance, and might enjoy that Duna Barnes novel very much.
Okay, ma'am. One more question, ma'am. What's your opinion on Lawrence Abe's When the Circus Came to Town? Themes running through compassion, community, and tolerance.
Ah, interesting. That is a book I don't know, actually. When the Circus Came to Town. What's it?
Yes,
Who is
ma'am.
it by?
Yes, ma'am.
This is a new title for me, so thank you. Who is it by?
Lawrence. Yep. Lawrence.
I can't comment on it because I don't know it, but I will read it, and I thank the person for the suggestion. I'm always finding new ones. There are hundreds and hundreds of circus stories. But perhaps the questioner has an answer himself?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, another question we have, ma'am, from Krishna Priya, a scholar from PSG Krishnamal from Coimbatore. When every aspect of a person, including queerness and disabilities, calling them freaks and such like Dawn, they promote the idea that it is all right to ridicule such abnormality. Is it all right to ridicule these people?
Well, these books, remember, were being written in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, and 40s, when thinking was rather different. But the whole idea of the circus, as I'm using it in relation to avant-garde arts, is very different from in real life and the freak shows where people went to stare at these bodies. In the circus stories, the idea, the kind of mythology around the circus, is that these people are part of the circus family. They have something to contribute. They have a place. They belong. They're accepted. And that was the point of the Juna Barnes quote as well, is that there's a place for all kinds of people and all kinds of bodies and all kinds of behaviors in the circus. It's a very tolerant and embracing environment in literature and art, or at least in. What I have to make clear is that I have many chapters in this project, and some of them look at very different aspects of the circus. But in my interest here is in the kind of political and social critique you can find in circus stories during these years, and the way in which even by just reproducing circus life, they are holding up a mirror to a repressive society that would have exterminated people with the wrong kinds of bodies and big skins and behaviors. So they're not holding them up in these stories for ridicule, but turn them into objects of love, friendship, heroes, and so on.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for patiently answering all the queries. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, there were some very interesting questions and some thoughtful questions. Thank you. And I also got a new book to read, so that's helpful. And I would be very grateful for other suggestions if people have them for me.
Sure, ma'am.
Very interesting.
Okay. Thank you. We request the participants to give their feedback if possible by unmuting themselves.
First, I wish to thank Kim, ma'am, for her patience and a very beautiful presentation. Wonderful, ma'am. We really enjoyed. As I said, you are my role model.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes, it was really enjoyable. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure, and I hope that we will have a chance to talk again, Swapna. Thank you.
I'm sure. And Shobha, thank you so much for letting me join in. I'm so grateful to you.
Ma'am. I'm happy that you Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. I would ask you to enlighten us on the present fate of circus internationally. For us here in India, circus is almost a dead performance. So I just want to know how circus is treated in the world right now, at least in UK.
Well, circuses are struggling as every kind of theatrical performance because of the virus. People can't gather and the performers can't perform unless we have a few things in the open air now. Circuses have also been quite rightly affected by legislation about animal rights. So we have many fewer performing animals now, which changes the nature of circuses. They've become much more athletic, I think, than athletic and theatrical than perhaps they were at one point. But they're thriving still. There's a huge audience that wants to go see companies like Cirque du Soleil, for instance. I think in fiction, however, which is really my interest, the circus has become a really magical place that I think is, they are impossible, the kinds of circuses that you often read about. They're too extraordinary, but I think that they are in many ways being a kind of metaphor for virtual reality and augmented reality and the internet as a place of illusion. So I think we have many new ways in which art and fiction are using circuses.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, we have one more question. What makes you to choose this topic in the modern context of living, as everyone has almost forgotten?
Well, one of my interests is actually looking at the kind of material that has been forgotten and wondering whether when we turn our backs on material, we're losing something. So I like to recover and re-examine material from the perspective of the person, the learned person. I'm not hearing very clearly. I'm sorry, it's breaking up.
Yeah, at my end also. I think something going wrong with mine also.
Right.
Ma'am, we have one more question popping out.
Okay.
Is a circus a heterotopia or a carnivalist space or both?
I would say both. It depends on which examples you choose and how you read them. For this particular focus, I think it was more of a carnival because I like the way the interruption to everyday life is a way of recalibrating it. And I'm getting a lot of feedback suddenly now, I think because we have unmuted. But anyway, for me, I would say that in these decades of the early 20th century, carnival is the more appropriate term. But later on, I think we can combine carnival and heterotopia very usefully. Yeah.
So I think we can we've come to the concluding program of this program, conclusion of this program. So now I invite or request Dr. P. Chitra to propose. I request Dr. P. Chitra, Assistant Professor of English, to propose vote of thanks.
Yes. Good evening to everyone. Let us be grateful to people who make us happy. It seems to be a great honor to propose the vote of thanks to all who have helped us in making this webinar a very resounding success. first and foremost, I would to express my profound gratitude to our management, Honorable President Dr. M. Aruchami Sir, Dynamic Secretary and Director Dr. C.A. Vasiki Ma'am, beloved Principal Dr. M. Lakshminaswamy Sir, CEO Dr. V. Chinnuswamy Sir, Dean R&D Dr. Paul Sami, Dean Academics Dr. Madan Shankar, IKSC Coordinator Dr. Sujata Ma'am, for awakening the passion and desire to support us as a ladder to reach the pole of success. Their constant encouragement has helped us in the best way. Thank you all. The vibration of gratitude attracts more positive thoughts. I extend my warm gratitude to our chief guest, Dr. Kimberley Reynolds, Professor of Children's Literature, School of English Literature and Language, Newcastle University, UK, and Senior Editor, International Research in Children's Literature, for making excellent presentation and making this webinar interesting and meaningful. We will ever remain grateful to you, and we thank you for being with us as chief guest today. Thank you so much, ma'am. Appreciation can make a day, even a change a life. So I specifically thank the conveners, Dr. Shobha Ramasamy, Assistant Professor and Head, Department of English, KONGUNADU Arts and Science College. Next, I thank Dr. Anto Thomas, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English and Research Center, St. Thomas College, Thrissur, who have been the backbone of this event. Success is only for those who work hard and run till the end. I wish to express my sincere gratitude to all the organizing secretaries, research scholars, students of both aided and unaided for paying your valuable attention and also suggesting with your opinions. Thank you all. Life does not just happen, it requires your participation. It renders immense pleasure to thank all the participants and professors from various colleges for active participation, and also my special thanks to participants from other countries. With these warm words and kind message, we move to the end of today's session. So student friends, run your destination with strong determination. Once again, I thank you all for your kind attention and making this webinar a grand success. Have a great day. Jai Hind. Thank you.
And let me add my thanks to you all as well. It was a great pleasure to be here this evening with you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And thank you all the other participants here who patiently waited. And we really apologize for that inconvenience caused on behalf of our department. Thank you so much.
Right, goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Have a good day, Kim.
Goodbye, ma'am. Hope that you visit India soon, ma'am. We'll invite you. Please come.
Two o'clock, 2:30
4 o'clock.